Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. I hope you're all well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Actually, it would help if my video were on. I am Sawa Sante, and I will be the moderator for this first session of D20 Foundations. We generally, in our Decoloniality network spaces, play a song to get us in the mood, but we're starting a bit late, and so we will skip that. But if you wanted to hear the song we're going to play, it's Good Day by Nappy Roots. And we might have an opportunity to play it later on in the session, but I'd just like us to get started. One moment. Okay. So then I will share my screen so we can get into the session. I would ask if you could please introduce yourselves in the chat box, your name, where you're from, and what you're hoping to get out of this session. That would be very helpful. Shani Moore is also moderating that space, so she will be able to answer questions and just direct as needed. So feel free to put any questions in that space. So let's get started. Greetings and welcome to D20 Foundation Session 1, where we will be introducing decoloniality and exploring the theme of why this, why now, rethinking global power through a decolonial lens. This is the opening session of D20 and part of a three-part series to provide foundational knowledge to engage in the work of decoloniality. We will follow up the D20 Foundation session with D20 Week, which will take place from November 17th through November 25th, 2025. My name is Sawa Asante. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be the moderator for this opening session. I'm really excited to kick off this series, and I look forward to the conversations ahead and perspectives that will be shared. Before beginning our conversation, I would like to share our grounding agreements to foster a space of dialogue that is rooted in care, love-rooted justice, and curiosity. We will begin by acknowledging the 4 denials developed by the collective Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. We'll be popping their link in the chat so you can check out their work as well. The collective have outlined 4 denials that are at the core of so much of our modern day colonial practices that are deeply harmful and rarely acknowledged. They share that our decolonial perspective is informed and inspired by Indigenous analyses and practices that affirm that our current global problems are not related to a lack of knowledge, but to an inherently violent modern colonial habit of being. 4 denials structure this habit of being. The denial of systemic violence and complicity in harm, the fact that our comforts, securities, enjoyments, and even the technological tools we are using to connect today are subsidized by expropriation and exploitation somewhere else. The denial of the limits of the planet, the fact that the planet cannot sustain exponential growth and consumption. The denial of entanglement, our insistence in seeing ourselves as separate from each other and the land, rather than entangled within a living, wider metabolism that is biointelligent. And denial of the depth and magnitude of the problems we face, the tendencies to search for hope and simplistic solutions and make us feel and look good. In addition to these 4 denials, that make us feel and look good. In addition to these 4 denials, and to ensure that we create a space for dialogue that is fruitful and helpful, we ask that we engage in this space with care and compassion for one another. Now for some digital housekeeping. First, I'd like to announce that this session is being recorded to share and allow others who could not be here to also be a part of the conversation. Additionally, all participants will be muted until the Q&A and breakout portion of the session. This meeting has closed captioning language services. If you click the CC button, you may have to click more to find that CC button. At the control bar at the bottom of your screen, you can select your preferred available language. Feel free to use a chat function for comments, reactions, and questions. Finally, we'll be sharing a short survey at the end of the session. It will take about 3 to 5 minutes, and your feedback is incredibly valuable so we can get a sense of what went well and where we can improve. All right, now that we've covered logistics, I will share the session agenda. It was digital housekeeping. So in terms of the session flow, we'll have, I'll provide a short intro of TDN, Rooted Otherwise, the organization supporting this event, and D20, Decolonial 20. Next, we'll have a somatic session led by Tolu Mejolagbi. Then we'll have the conversation between Tshepo Madlingozi and Rosebell Kagumire. From that, we'll have our conversations portion. This is, I like to think of this as the special sauce of TDN and this decoloniality work in general. Some of this work can be done on your own as an individual, but at least from my experience, the greatest takeaways and insights I've gotten have been from conversations in community with others. So while we know everyone may not love breakout sessions or having larger conversations, we would ask that you consider staying for that portion to get the most out of the session. But if you're not comfortable with it, we do understand, but we would encourage you to please stay. After that, we will do a closeout and we will give you time to do the session survey. As I mentioned, my name is Sawa Asante, she, her pronouns. For those that may be visually impaired or unable to see their screen, I am a woman with dark brown skin, dark brown eyes, and black Afro textured hair. I'm actually not sure, sorry, housekeeping, can y'all see me? Or you only see the screen?
We see you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, okay. I have black Afro texture hair, and I'm wearing a yellow print that is multi-print that is often found in West African fashion. It is yellow and navy and white. And I have semi-large earrings. I would consider them medium-sized, but others would consider them large. I am part of the Decolonial 20 D20 planning team and a co-founder of the hosting organizations, the Decoloniality Network, or TDN for short, and Rooted Otherwise. I've been interested in the spaces of justice and care for as long as I can remember, but I connected with the framework of decoloniality while I was a graduate student, searching for a way of understanding international relations that was not rooted in the psychosis and philosophies of white men from the West. What I found was most of the people who were heralded as the great thinkers and philosophers of international relations were quite preoccupied with war, warmongering, domination, and conquering. I felt there had to be another way to understand how humans interact, engage, and understand one another. Decoloniality changed the trajectory of, honestly, my life because it gave me a framework and a platform to understand the world, both the world around me and the world within me. Before co-founding TDN, I also worked for 2 decades across various nonprofit organizations and agencies in the UN system. My time in these spaces confirmed how prevalent and deeply entrenched coloniality was across so many sectors, even when we're doing what is considered good work. While at the International Rescue Committee, I co-founded a personnel-driven organization to unpack and confront racism and coloniality in our organization and the wider humanitarian sector. A year and a half later, I moved back to working at the UN, and a former colleague who is on our call now and helping out in the chat, Shani Moore, and a great connector in the UN system, introduced me to another personnel-driven space in the UN that was doing almost the exact same work that we were doing at IRC. Being in these 2 spaces reinforced a belief that I and many of us who do this work have, that there are many of us who are deeply interested, invested in trying to make sense of the systems we live in, but we are often separated by barriers of language organizational rules and expectations, and geographies. I soon connected with TDN and Rooted Otherwise co-founders Nikos Jordan and Adan Mayisa, who also had their own experiences that led them to connect with the framework of decoloniality as a pathway to deeper truth and liberation. Both Adanma and Nikos will be moderating future sessions, so if you tune in, they will share their experiences that led them to this work. TDN was birthed out of a desire to foster connection, share knowledge, build community, and develop tools to advance the principles of decoloniality. Rooted Otherwise serves as the consulting arm of TDN. We offer evaluation and learning services from a decolonial perspective. D20 was born out of a deep desire to reflect on the times we are in and how to navigate towards deeper meanings centered on truth, love-rooted justice, care, and connection. We are focused on doing the messy, beautiful, and transformative work of decolonizing ourselves, our communities, our institutions, and our systems. We do this by centering the voices and perspectives of marginalized people, connecting to ancestral and ecological wisdom, and where appropriate, co-developing alternate ways of moving through this life experience. We see D20 as an opportunity to build community with people interested in this transformative work, learn from and share with a global community of aligned individuals, introduce ourselves to a wider audience, and create needed space for learning and engaging with the frameworks and applications of decoloniality. Now that I've shared a bit about the background and the founding of D20, I'll pass the floor on to Tolu Mejolagbe, who will lead us in a somatic session to connect with our bodies, minds, and spirits as we begin this conversation. Tolu is the founder of Remember Counseling, a therapy practice dedicated to supporting BIPOC individuals on their journey to feeling safe in their bodies. And just to define, because different terms are used in different areas, BIPOC
So you are muted.
You're muted.
Hello, thank you. So did you hear my intro of Tolu?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The practice is known for integrating nervous system regulation, practical somatic tools, and culture's responsive trauma recovery. Remember Counseling empowers BIPOC clients to live authentically and reclaim a sense of wholeness through decolonized approaches to healing. So I will stop sharing and pass on to Tolu to lead us in the somatic session.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tolu again. Thank you, Sewa, for the introduction. It cut out right when you were describing BIPOC, so I'll just go ahead and reiterate what BIPOC means. BIPOC means Black, Indigenous people of color. So I work mostly with racialized bodies, essentially, is what that means. So thank you again. I'm very grateful to be here in this space today. I will be leading us through a somatic practice. For those who are not familiar with somatic, modality, somatic therapy, somatic healing. It's essentially a bottom-up process. Here in the West, we're very cerebral, very cognitive focused, and often we forget that our stress and our trauma lives in our body as well too, right? So I like to make an emphasis when I'm working with folks of all bodies that trauma lives in our bodies, stress lives in our bodies, and also to how we metabolize information too. It lives up here, but also too the body carries the wisdom of that information and how can we embody that. So I want to prime us for this session today, and not only us listening to what's going to be spoken about today, but also what is happening in our bodies as we're taking in the information we're listening today too. So I will lead us through a 5-minute practice. It's a body scan essentially. So I will be leading us through a practice and I'll be having us just orient to what's coming up for our bodies. We often don't get much time throughout our day to slow down. So I want to invite us just to slow down for 5 minutes before we enter into this space. So I will get my timer ready so I can be prompt. So I want to invite you to just orient to your space, or you can orient to my space behind me here. And I want you to find anything in your space that feels grounding to you. Just take a moment, look around the space you're sitting in. In my space, I have a lot of plants, so I like to orient to the plants in my space. And as you do that too, I want you to notice how your body is in your chair, or wherever you're sitting, if it's on the ground, where you're making contact. Notice how your back may be supported. Notice if your feet are on the ground. And now I want us to either soften your gaze or close your eyes. And I just want us to be present. I don't want us to think too much about what I'm doing, but just be present and notice any sensations that may arise for you. So we're going to check in with our body today. So we're going to start at the top of our head, check in with our head today. How's our head doing? Just notice. Are you feeling any tension in your head? Does it feel light? Does it feel heavy? We're just practicing noticing today. And then I want us to move to our neck. Let's just notice how our neck supports our head. Just notice your neck. Is there any tension there? Let's just notice that. And then let's move down to our shoulders. Just notice your shoulders. What are you noticing in your shoulders? They feel loose, they feel tight. Are you holding your shoulders? Just notice your shoulders. And then I want to bring us to our chest. What are we noticing in our chest? Just checking in. We're just noticing, that's all. And then let's check in with our stomach. What's happening in our gut? You noticing any tension there? Any sensations arising for you? Let's just notice our gut area, our stomach. I want to invite you to notice your arms. Just notice the left arm. Just notice the right arm. Notice your hands. And I want to bring you into your legs. Just notice your right leg. Is any sensation arising there? Just checking in. That's all. We're just checking in. And then our left leg, checking in there. What's happening? Then our feet. Let's just notice our feet. Our feet carry us. They do a lot of labor for us. Let's just notice our feet. If they're making any connection with the floor beneath you, or your feet, your shoes. Can you wiggle your toes? Are your shoes too tight? They're too loose? Just notice. Let's just be noticing. And then let's check in with your back. Your upper back. Noticing there's any tension. Your mid back. And then your lower back. And I want to invite you to slowly open your eyes and just reorient to your space again. And maybe you can reconnect with that object in your space or in your environment that is grounding for you. And just notice how you feel now versus how you felt before we started the practice. Just notice that. Thank you. That's the end of our somatic practice today. And if you would like to know more about me, I will share my website in the chat box. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tolu. I am feeling so much more relaxed. It actually made me think like Zoom has been stressing my life today, like the share functions. And I feel like I've been just trying to get it right. And I just like, as we were doing the session, I was thinking, why am I allowing this like inanimate tool that's supposed to be helping to connect us, like disconnecting me from this process? So I really do appreciate just the reminder. Yeah, so thank you so much. Um, just let me know, can you see the main slide again? Is it back? Yes, the spotlight. Is it spotlit? If you could just let me know, co-host.
We can see the slides, but we need to
Okay.
see you.
Oh, you can't see me. That? Oh, okay. It would help if I started my video. But yeah, thank you so much, Tolu. I'm feeling just a lot more present and in the moment. So very appreciative of that. Thank you. Um, so I would like to then get into our session and introduce our first speaker, Commissioner Tshepo Madlingozi. Commissioner Tshepo Madlingozi studied law and sociology in South Africa, Cameroon, and the United Kingdom before being appointed to the South African Commission for Human Rights. He was the director of the Center before being appointed to the South African Commission for Human Rights. He was the director of the Center for Applied Legal Studies at Wits University and an associate professor at the same university, where he taught human rights and social justice. He has been a consultant for local organizations and intergovernmental organizations, including the Pan-African Parliament and the UN Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. He sat on the boards of several civil society organizations, including the Rural Democracy Trust, the Mining Affected Communities United in Action, Women Affected by Mining Action, the Institute for Social Dialogue, the Socioeconomic Rights Institute of South Africa, Imbiza, Journal of African Writing, the Center for Human Rights, the Zimbabwe Exile Forum, UFS, Amandla Mobi, and the Africa Ikalafi Pluriversity. He was also a member of the steering committee of the African Coalition for Corporate Accountability, the Right to Protest Project Coalition, and the advisory board of the Health Justice Initiative. For 13 years, from 2005 to 2018, he worked with and for Kulamani Support Group, a 120,000-strong social movement of victims and survivors of apartheid, as National Advocacy Coordinator and later the chairperson. Between 2021 and 2022, he was appointed chief panelist for the South African Human Rights Commission inquiry into racial discrimination and other forms of discrimination in advertising. He is a visiting professor at the International Institute of Social Studies of Erasmus University, Rotterdam, and a faculty member of the Vienna Master of Arts in Applied Human Rights. He is a co-editor of the South African Journal on Human Rights. He is a co-editor of Symbol or Substance, Socioeconomic Rights in South Africa, and a co-editor of Introduction to Law and Legal Skills in South Africa. We are deeply honored to have Tshepo here with us today. Next, I will introduce Rosebell Kagumire. Rosebell is a Pan-African feminist, writer, public speaker, and activist with expertise in media, feminist knowledge production, gender justice, human rights, and peace and conflict resolution. Rosebell is currently a PhD candidate in digital media at the University of Porto. As the curator and editor of African Feminism, an online platform amplifying feminist voices across Africa, she is a leading voice on justice and equality on the continent. Her work is featured in books including None of Us is Free Until All of Us Are Free, New Perspectives on Global Solidarity, and I Am Nala. She also co-edited Challenging Patriarchy, The Role of Patriarchy in the Rollback of Democracy. She is a columnist for The New Internationalist and has contributed to The Guardian, Al Jazeera, and other international media outlets. Rosebell is a founding member of the African Feminist Collective on Feminist Informed Policies and serves on the editorial board of Minority Africa, an online platform that reports on the rights of minority groups in Africa. Rosebell holds a master's in media, peace, and conflict studies from the UN-mandated University for Peace in Costa Rica, and an undergraduate degree in mass communication from Makerere University in Uganda. We are deeply honored to have Rosebell here as well. For me, having heard both of these dynamic forces speak, I am very much looking forward to this conversation and deeply honored to be a part of it. Now, I will pass the floor on to Tshepo to give us some grounding on what is decoloniality, what are the terms associated with it, and what are the lessons we can learn from South Africa's history and present in terms of confronting the colonial state and finding pathways forward. Tshepo, I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass on to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me this morning. Can you hear me very well?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to share my my document, but how do I do that now? I've sent it to you, Sarah and Adanma.
Okay. I can try to share.
But we don't have time. Thank you so much, and it's so good to be here. First of all, let me say thank you to Thule. That was excellent. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. I also feel calmer, present, and ready to do the work in all senses. So thank you so much for that. And thank you all for joining us. So this is the first session for a series of sessions, as I understand it. So what I've been asked to do is to briefly speak to the history of coloniality, decoloniality, to speak to some of the fundamental concepts or foundational concepts, and then link that to South Africa. As you know, South Africa hosts the G20 this year, and therefore I will be speaking from that perspective. Because this is the first session, I won't go into details in terms of a critique of the G20. I hope that will unfold as we go along in this series. But as I said, once again, thank you so much to the Decoloniality Network for having me. As you would have heard, I come from South Africa. It is a country without a name. It's simply called South Africa. One of three countries in Africa without a name, the other one being Central African Republic, the other one being West Sahara. So what does it mean to come from a country without a name? What does it mean culturally, spiritually, epistemologically? But also, what does it mean to come from a country that 31 years into democracy, it is still called by the name that was imposed by the settlers in 1910. So it's an unhomely space. It's a space of homelessness. It's a space of rootlessness, not to have roots. So that's my geopolitics of knowledge, where I come from. I come from that country without a name. Just as a footnote, I'll be speaking in my personal capacity, not in the capacity of my official employment, not as a commissioner, but in my personal capacity. So that is just a disclaimer. So I've just been given 15 minutes for a presentation that I normally give over 6 months, a course that I always give in 6 months. And I'll try to compress it in about 13 minutes. From a historical perspective, you will know that South Africa was colonized in 1652. So South Africa, compared to most African countries, has the longest history of colonization and resistance. Most African countries were colonized for about 60 years, from the late 1900s, from the late 1800s to about 1960, 1965. South Africa was colonized, what we call South Africa was colonized from 1652. In fact, the first conflict between a black person and a white person in South Africa was in 1510. Now, 1510 is very close to 1492. 1492, of course, is significant for us colleagues because we can use that as a marker for the start of global coloniality. 1492. 1492. That was a date when Christopher Columbus sailed from Europe to go and colonize the rest of the world. But of course, the condition of possibility of Christopher Columbus being given permission to go and colonize the rest of the world was the fact that the Moors, M-O-R-S, the Moors who were ruling over Southern Europe, had been defeated. But not only that, we know that it was also the time when the Jewish people were expelled for the first time in Southern Europe. We should not forget about that in the context of present day debates. So we can go to the first slide in the interest of time. We can skip. Yeah, skip. Yeah, we can stay there. So 1492 is a marker because it's what in euphemism terms we call the expansion of Europe, but really it was the time when Europe was colonizing the rest of the world, 1492. Now, what are we talking about when we talk about decoloniality? Decoloniality, to summarize very briefly, conceives of the problem not as a question of racism, not as a question of patriarchy, heteronormativity, ableism. It conceives the problem as the problem of ongoing colonization, and that patriarchy, racism, ableism, heteronormativity are symptoms of the creation of the modern world in 1492. So this is what distinguishes it from feminism, from critical race theory, from queer critique, and so forth. From a decolonial perspective, the modern world is a colonial world that is very much cruel to so-called non-Western people, but not only that, but also to non-human beings. And that the solution is to move away from so-called modernity to transmodernity, and understanding that the West is not the only source of modernity, but that all civilization, all cultures have their own forms of modernity. That's why, colleagues, we should always have a prefix when you talk about modernity. We should always say Western modernity, not just modernity, because it's African modernity, there's Islamic modernity, there are different forms of modernity. But most importantly, the emancipatory horizon of decoloniality is a state of good living, or Ubuntu, summa causa, they call it in parts of Latin America. I want to emphasize that the emancipatory goal of decoloniality is not to delink in order to create a black world. It's not to delink in order to create a South American world. That is a mistake. That is falling into the trap set by the colonizers to delink, to separate from Western modernity, to separate from the global matrix of coloniality is a tactic, not a strategy. It's a tactic, not a strategy. The goal is pluriversalism, a world where there are multiple ways of being in one world, not the creation of separatism and separate world. From that perspective, it differs from Black nationalism. It differs from certain understanding of negritude from Senghor. I'll come back to that. If you go to the next slide, very quickly in terms of history. So as I said, 1492, the expansion of Europe. But what is important is that that expansion, for the first time, carved the world into two. It carved the world into two: the human world and the non-human world. Europe, after the expulsion of the Moors and the Jewish people, thought itself as white and as only human beings. And therefore, it went to colonize the rest of the world from that perspective, that we are the only rational human beings. Not only that we are Christians and we can come give you religion, but that we are the only thinking beings. Others are savages or pre-modern or people who are immature, that their ontology is immature and we are coming to help them. So the division of the world into the world of human beings and the ones who are not human beings below the line of the human beings was what we called a terra nullius, the land of nobodies. Terra nullius doesn't mean nobody's land. It means the land of no one. What you see is not human beings. You see flowers, fauna, and animals, and people who are living there, Aboriginal people of Australia, the indigenous people of Latin America, indigenous people of South Africa, are not human beings. Now, I will come back to that because it matters in the context of the G20, that the world is still structured in this divided line between the North and the South. And up to today, despite the development of international law, despite the development of the United Nations, there's still that global matrix of coloniality. Please hold on to that as we talk about the G20 and the inclusion of certain countries into the G20. Now, the most important thing to understand was that the colonization of other nations was predicated on not only colonization of knowledge. You are not human beings, you cannot think, but because you cannot think, you are not human. I think, therefore I am. You remember that? I think, therefore I am. They don't think, therefore they are not. So coloniality of knowledge goes together with coloniality of beings, and go together with coloniality of power. Because they don't think, and they are not, I'm entitled to dispossess their land, to enslave them, to kill them, and to subjugate them. Coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, coloniality of being. We'll come back to that. Let's move on. Now, this definition of coloniality by Maldonado Torres, Nelson Maldonado Torres, I think is very useful. That coloniality differs from colonialism. Coloniality differs from colonialism. Colonialism is the physical administration of another country. It's tied to imperialism, of course. And it can be either settler colonialism, as in the case of South Africa, Mozambique, parts of Latin America, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Or it can be colonialism without settlement. But what matters is that in the process of colonialism, subjectivities are changed, gender binaries are imposed, standards of beauties are imposed, standards of what counts as knowledge are imposed, and that becomes sedimented, such that even after the last colonial administrator leaves, coloniality survives. The colonization of the mind. Who is a human being, who's not human being? What counts as beauty, what doesn't count as beauty? How do we relate to non-human beings? That survives colonialism. That's what we're talking about. So we need to, in the first place, distinguish between colonialism and coloniality. You can go to the next slide. But coloniality is something that in Africa, we have been using a different term for the same thing. In Africa, we've been talking about neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism. And this is a term that was introduced by Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, saying, even after colonialism, we continue to be governed by the empire through the economy, through the education system, and so forth and so forth. So coloniality for us is a different name for neocolonialism. I want to say this because they say sometimes a mistaken understanding that we take these terms from Latin America. Yes, coloniality fashioned and made popular by Latin American scholars. But in Africa, we had the same terms in the concept of neo-colonialism. So that is just the distinction. The distinction, very importantly, being that colonialism can go away, but coloniality and neo-colonialism survives that. So if you go to the next slide very quickly, you will remember that in 2015 in South Africa, there was a decolonial turn. Decolonial turn that was propagated, advocated by students in South Africa, who said that, 25 years after democracy, we still feel colonized. Now, that was very interesting because we always thought that as a country of Mandela, as a country of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we had been liberated. But these students were saying that is actually not true. And therefore, they remind us of a fourth important principle, that you can have democracy without decolonization. You can have democracy without decolonization. You can have freedom without liberty, without liberation. And therefore, the decolonial turn was very, very important. Go to the next slide, please. And as you recall that, this movement was global. This is in Oxford, but also in different places even in the United States of America, this decolonial turn. Now, if you go to the next slide, in terms of the fundamental concepts that we can think about that are very important when we talk about decolonization or decoloniality. The first important concept is a concept of epistemicide. Epistemicide. Side meaning death, homicide, femicide, you know what I'm talking about. So epistemology combined with side means the killing of other people's knowledge. Colonialism can only sustain itself if it kills the knowledge of the colonized. But here I want to be very clear at two levels. There's a mistake that people normally make. The first mistake is to say epistemicide, meaning it means the killing or the suppression of indigenous knowledge. That's one part of it. The second part of it is that it is a cannibalization from the word cannibal, cannibalization. So colonizers only survive because they also steal knowledge from the indigenous people and then claim it as their own knowledge. That is also part of epistemicide. You can think of algebra, mathematics. You can think about astrology. You can think about so many things that the Western world claims that it is their own scientific knowledge, but we know that they stole it from the indigenous people that they conquered. So epistemicide, the killing, the suppression, the subjugation, but also secondly, the appropriation, the stealing of knowledge. And therefore, when we think about what is justice for epistemicide, it must be both. It must be reclaiming our knowledges and it must be valorizing our knowledges. The second fundamental concept, of course, the concept of epistemic racism, epistemic sexism. If you think about the social sciences, I can take example of sociology or take example of philosophy or political science. They always talk about the five fathers of the discipline. Sociology, Max Weber, Descartes, and Karl Marx. You know, those are the you have not spoken sociology unless you have spoken those fathers. Philosophy, Pluto, and all those people, all the way up to Foucault. You know, that 5% of the world becomes the knowledge system in the social sciences. So epistemic racism or epistemic sexism, dead white men. I will skip other concept, but the other fundamental concept is the concept of pluriversal, meaning the need to move away from universalism. And the understanding there is that when we talk about universalism, that is a shorthand for westernization. That universalism is another way of saying westernization. You can think about how people talk about world class, whatever, world class festival, world class, whatever. World class is always a shorthand for Western standard. So you're moving away from universal to pluriversal, multiple universes. That is the goal of decoloniality. Similarly, at the university level, move away from a university to a pluriversity, a pluriversity in the sense that an institution that recognizes different ways of being in the world and understanding the world. But fundamentally, the last concept, that the end goal of decoloniality is not simply to reclaim your own knowledge, it's not simply to valorize indigenous knowledge. It is the creation of the world based on humaneness. In Africa, we call it Ubuntu, Botu. Parts of Latin America, they call it Summa Causa, good living. That is the fundamental goal. And the understanding there is that colonization dehumanized all of us. For the conquered people, double consciousness, internalized racism, internalized homophobia, internalized ableism. For colonizers, historical colonizers, dehumanize them, because they also think that they're superior to other people. Therefore, collective liberation based on Ubuntu and Somokaza. I know I've got about 5 minutes, so I'll race through the slides. You can go to the next one. Decolonization does not mean diversity. Decolonization does not mean diversity. So we need to distinguish decolonization, decoloniality from two fundamental concepts. One, the concept of diversity. Two, the concept of transformation. Transformation is not decoloniality. Diversity is not decoloniality. We can go to the next slide. So, critical theory that comes from Europe. We like it, we want it. From Karl Marx, from Foucault, from Hannah Arendt. We love, from Adorno, we love that critical theory. But critical theory is not enough to decolonize the world because it's a Eurocentric critique of Eurocentrism. Post-colonial scholarship, let me leave that, but transformation. Transformation is the idea that at the university level, you hire more people who identify as women, people who identify as Black, Indigenous, and other minorities. You employ people who are gender diverse, but the ontology or the being of the university remain the same. That in your curriculum, you include more books by people from Africa, from Latin America. But the neoliberal nature of the university remains. So that's transformation. Transformation is diversifying, is about inclusion without changing the power structure of the world, of the university, of the workplace, of the family, etc., etc. So transformation, we need to distinguish it from decolonization. In fact, at best, transformation is the first step towards decolonization. At worst, transformation is used to mask the need not to decolonize. In the interest of time, let's go to the next slide. How much time do I have? So for decolonization, the point is not to be included in the historical world created by the colonizers or by men or by heterosexual people or by so etc. etc. The point is to end that world and build a new world. So it's not about inclusion, it's not about diversifying the world as it is, but it's about ending the world. Once again, we can think about this in the context of the G20. What happens when the historical colonizers include South Africa and other countries? Is that a decolonial move? Is that a transformation move? We can skip. But we should also there's also a need to decolonize decoloniality. There's also a need to decolonize decoloniality. Oftentimes, decoloniality recenters that which it seeks to dismantle. That instead of talking about a new vision, it gets stuck in the anti-white, anti-whatever. But it doesn't talk about a new vision. And by talking about anti, A-N-T-I, anti, it recenters that it wished to decenter. We need to be careful of that. We also need to be careful about, not talking too much about the need to reclaim native discourse or native knowledges. That's a big mistake. The native only comes into existence when the settler arrives. Therefore, it cannot be your emancipatory horizon that you want to reclaim native discourse. That's a mistake. It is falling into the colonial library. But also, a lot of decoloniality is very masculine, very, very masculine in the mannerism, in the temperament, in the language, in the activism. And therefore, it ends up doing more harm than it seeks to do. We can talk about that later on. Let's skip to the last slide. I think I'm out of time. We can skip to the last slide. So about 15 years ago, the then South African president came up with a concept of African Renaissance. African Renaissance. And he came up with it as an antidote, he said, against what you call global apartheid. You can go to the previous slide briefly, if you go to the previous slide. And you can hear from how he spoke about the African Renaissance that it had some decolonization sensibilities. It was about reclaiming humanity. It's about reclaiming dignity. It's about reshaping the world. It's about moving away from being told how to live in the world. African Renaissance as a antidote to global apartheid. If you go to the next slide, that philosophical project of African Renaissance led to a project called NEPAD, the New Partnership for African Development. And the whole point here was that there needs to be a reimagination of how Africa reinserts itself into the world, away from Western tutelage. So on paper, very powerful. On paper, a decolonial project, but in reality, a project that was about inclusion, about assimilation. A project number two that was steeped in capitalism and neoliberalism. And lastly, a project that was based on sub-imperialism, that as South Africa, we will be the voice of Africa. I want to end there to say, as we think about G20, as we think about decoloniality, we should be careful that we don't talk left and walk right. It's a good thing that South Africa is hosting the G20 summit. But let's not kid ourselves. This is not a decolonial project because it's still a project based on inclusion, assimilation, and about not fundamentally restructuring the world. I'm panicking because Sarah has switched on food. Thank you so much.
Tshepo, thank you so much for this grounding context. It is robust. I see that you are a professor, a teacher. I have been like paying attention, and I really appreciate what you've shared, because we know that a lot of people are joining and have different understandings, relationships to this work, to these terms, and that grounding is so important in terms of being able to have these conversations. So thank you so very much. I've learned so much in this space. Really grateful. Tshepo has also asked us, in the spirit of his decolonial philosophy, not to refer to him as professor or commissioner, which I really respect and admire. So just also wanted to let everyone know as when we start engaging in conversation. Now I will pass the floor on to Rosebell Kagumire, who will give us an understanding of what can coloniality look like in spaces that perhaps we don't see the beneficiaries of colonialism. And so how does it move? How does it shape spaces? And also giving us the perspective of somebody who comes from a non-settler colonial country of Uganda, how colonialism looks in different contexts as well. So I'll pass the floor on to Rosebell, who will provide more context to the conversation. Rosebell, please. And I don't believe you have any slides, so I will just pass the floor on to you. Is Rosebell on? One moment, please.
You can't unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can find you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
And mute again. It's a great pleasure to be in this community with you all, and I will do my best to kind of share perspectives. I think Tshepo has really done a great job as the teacher is to really lay ground for this. So it will be me sharing really from my arriving at the work really, and as somebody from, of course, not only from Uganda, but from multiple realities and multiple identities and experiences, but also from learning from African feminist movements and how they've been also very, very, very instrumental in making us, many of us, especially I as an African woman who could always feel aligned to the Pan-Africanist, decolonial movement, but at the same time alienated because, again, it's always been a man's face, you know, that represents all this, and without any really reference always erasure of African women's contributions, whether it's in the knowledge, but also in the very struggle that the way we come to learn about decolonization and decoloniality. It's very important for us to see that. For me, on this, I would like to share some reading from Professor Sylvia Tamale, who's one of our, teachers and really a continental powerhouse and feminist teacher for us all. In her book, Decolonization and Afrofeminism, she really sets out to look at decolonization and decoloniality as these terms connote an active action of undoing or reversal. And then she says for Africa, the concept is heavily burdened with the deep histories, many of whose consequences are irreversible. So again, the idea that we are trying to reverse sometimes is not actually possible for many of these things that have been done to do a reversal. And the concepts really speak to the dismantling of several layers of a complex and entrenched colonial structures, ideologies, narratives, identities, practices that pervade every aspect of our lives. And most of these systems have become commonplace, if not common sense, in our day-to-day lives. Among them, religion, language, education, dress, music, media, public holidays, housing, sport, to name it all. Any day you wake up, all these colonial structures have become so embedded that people not only accept them without reflection, but also can defend them as practices that are really tradition. So I'll share a short story from early this week. Social media has made us all very connected and follow people's stories. So a good friend, a friend and someone I admire, a Kenyan activist and media personality, Adelo Nyango, last week, if not 2 weeks ago, had a clip that was trending massively on TikTok. And in this clip, she was sort of in a poetic way delivering why her marriage did not work, and she was very honest and vulnerable in talking about how she had been expected to be a traditional wife, whom she was never, and she was expected to have a child immediately. And to add to that, she shares that she was actually expected to change her name, which was never going to. So then that made the marriage was fall apart. So what followed was an intense conversation around, if you don't want to be traditional, what is how can you not take, how you want to get married and you don't want to take a man's name? And if you've been following, probably another debate in South Africa is that the Constitutional Court allowed that men could take their wives' names, and that again, very, very on the other side of the continent, you see then a legal precedent causing again this kind of backlash about culture and norms, and it reminded me for us to ask ourselves to stop. What is culture? Who shapes the culture? For many African countries, for many African nations, pre-colonial nations, women were not expected to take men's names. In fact, the idea that woman changes their name after marriage is very European colonial ideas that Tshepo has already alluded, the idea that other people could be owned, for example, women became property. Right? So that is imposed through Christianity and other norms and laws. And now in 2025, Africans are using TikTok and other technologies that we think advanced, but we are actually inculcating and defending, and even really violently defending, a colonial imposition as our culture. So all this is to show that how really coloniality pervades all of our life, that it is going to take a great effort, collective effort, to really work to really get us thinking of why are we willing to call this our culture, and why are we uncompromising, because that is coloniality. The idea that even if something was culture, that someone cannot step out of that culture and impose that somehow culture is binary and there's no way you can bargain with it. That is so imposed through rules and moral codes and practice and norms that become a resemblance of the colonial of the colonial experience we've seen. So names, for example, people had to abide by things like that. It's the same like people had to name their children English names. People had to name their children, biblical names, because if you did not, your child will not be baptized, for example. And if your child is not baptized, could not attend school. There was really a high price to which colonization put on people, that oftentimes that even today, because of the absence of white bodies in our countries, oftentimes we don't actually think that something is colonial, because for us, the idea is that colonization ended, we got independence. Yes, there is neo-colonization, but we think of it in terms of systems of trade, politics, where we see actively, Africa and our place in the world. But when it comes to things that you can actually begin with to interrogate yourself, we see a very major pushback. And this is the same. This is the same we see from names, from dress code. Dress code is another thing. In Uganda, we had a parliament passed a law a couple of years ago, which we had to really fight back. That was framed that anything, if a woman was wearing anything above their knee, that they could be prosecuted for pornography. So basically, conflating morality and dress and nudity in the African tradition, African continent, to pass on colonial understandings or impositions of what an African woman or an African body must be covered, must not be seen, and sexualization of an African body, and all these things. People might not see them as colonial, but these are colonialities, because the really irony, or what stood out when we were really fighting that, was that I often ask people, we live in the same country where some of our indigenous communities that whose cultures barely survived the colonization, they still do not wear clothes. And we have these people in our countries, and they are not criminalized for that. So you're in Kampala, the center of power, on one hand, debating a law that is going to imprison women, that was encouraging. Indeed, when it was passed briefly, women were targeted in different towns in the country. Men had now been given the power to tell women how short their skirt could be or whatever they could wear. And we saw women attacked really before the law was properly taken back after resistance. But this was that was the irony, that is, on one hand, you really have people who are working, they're still unbothered by your colonial constructions of dress in the same country, but the same country is passing laws that would criminalize everybody, but also the very community. So when you come to countries that really firsthand did not really have a lot of white colonizers staying in the same place, there tends to be a very big amnesia of what coloniality looked like. And it can make the work very extremely difficult, the work of liberation extremely difficult. And from dress, but also as often the reminder is that when we speak of coloniality, oftentimes we only refer to coloniality of what we see, white colonization, European colonization. But we know countries in East Africa and Horn of Africa and North Africa, West Africa, had already also gone through other waves of colonization. We see the impact of Arabization in very many countries in the continent. And that's often something that is very much either sidestepped, or there's no willingness to invest deeply to really understand what went on in communities. When you come to East African stories of what Arab traders were doing, the slave trade that was on the other East African coast, for example, or across the Sahel, what still happens today, it's something that we are still unwilling to pack in many ways, as we really concentrate heavily, of course, very much so on the impact of Europe on shaping Africa and impacting Africa. But we have to remember that then coloniality or decoloniality gives us that prism within which to really interact and see in our interactions with different forces and different empires, and what they left, what they took, what they left, what are those influences, what survived and what didn't survive, and how do we understand those structures, power structures, and how they shaped how today we ourselves deem who is a human being and who's not, whose knowledge can be accepted and whose knowledge is not. So we don't interrogate enough, for example, how the colonial states. Tshepo talked about South Africa not being an actual name of a country, but the reality is that Uganda is not an actual name of the country. So basically, where you go, the naming of countries in the continent itself, because it's not self-naming, unless those who have really invested time after post-independence to really take this seriously. But a lot of our leaders became more concerned with other issues of power, how to, go on with power, the colonial power that had been handed over, without really going through these questions of decolonizing. What does a name of your country mean? And we forget that the formation of the country, putting the center where you found different nations had their own centers, had their own ways of doing power, that now colonization makes new peripheries, even within a country, whether it's Uganda, you make different peripheries, and that breed very many ideas around identity, but also about how someone is seen as being, and the colonial making of who is not considered human, even in our own border today, persists. So it's really, really important to know that the manifestation of coloniality and the need for really looking at how do we really decolonize and understand decoloniality as a way in which we can really build consensus and find ways of building solidarity across is still very important. The other issue is, for example, the raging debates in our parliaments, in our communities, on queer rights in the continent. Uganda is being one of the many African countries that have been criminalizing and debating queer people's lives for decades. And not only because the Ugandan parliament is obsessed with that, but also we see aspects of imported like evangelical movement from America really infusing these already established ways of dehumanizing, which are rooted in colonial time laws. We know from feminist literature and Afro-feminist literature and work that African people have always been diverse. Gender diversity was actually something recognized and not policed and not punished. Gender expression, that our understanding of gender today is not probably how our communities understood gender, that actually we are carrying on the colonial legacy of our understanding of gender, and the refusal to let go of that understanding is very immense when there is a lot of more money and funds being put in the opposition to this kind of knowledge. So when you tell someone in my country that actually queer people were accepted, and these are the words, they were not derogatory in your world, that were used to describe this and that, people look at you like you're making this stuff up. So we have to remember that knowledge was also knowledge was at the heart of not only imposing laws, but taking away our very knowledge of things, of how we remember, how we understand, is still a very big thing. In some of the Ugandan languages, for example, in Lango, we know that there was clear description of a man who was not an effeminate man, and that effeminate man could marry and could be recognized as a woman. And these are culture norms that were already there, and there was not something that was going to cause a debate in the community. But this kind of knowledge is, of course, not our education system, first of all, will not educate people on this. Our education system is still a colonial education system, and whoever is giving the ideas of decolonization only means about them getting power. Hence, we speak decolonizing and still reproduce the same power dynamics of one man at the top who tells us everything we need to hear with little accountability. So hence you see heavy rhetoric today about decolonization and fighting France, which should be fought as it still controls the economies of 14 African countries. alongside fighting France, the very people that you see, whether you come from Burkina Faso or Mali, the very people that are talking about French colonization and the need to resist, they are looking for an alternative to punish queer people. You know, this is their, you wonder how can Captain Traore, who took power, he doesn't control even 60% of the country yet, but he's already passed through a bill to criminalize queer lives. Ask yourself, what kind of decolonization is that? Is because it's not present. It's just we are served, you know, rhetoric so that people can gain power in the name of, like, because they realize a need, that people really need a certain grounding, that there's a need to really find themselves and kind of find a way forward, kind of like, if we detach from this, where we go? But unfortunately, the things that are framed as alternatives oftentimes are the very things that are colonial, and people, because those values have come to be adopted using the law, the church, and the school, have come to be accepted, and parts of colonialism that are accepted today as values, shaped, you know, presented as African values we should fight for, but actually this is like coloniality, and there's no moving forward if you're really borrowing from colonization to present an alternative that this is the way forward. So we find like there's really limited kind of dreaming of alternative, where we go from here, even when we see certain things, and because this is a question of also power contestation, that cannot not go out of the window, the fact that you live in a patriarchy. So even when you talk about decoloniality, you're almost talking a whole different language to each other, with men who are in these movements, and they're the last even accept, they're cheering the governments, and these young leaders who are and queer, who are criminalizing queer lives, who are, you know, all sorts of anything. So it's very important to know that all these things are manifesting today, because we are not having an honest conversation on what coloniality looks like, and therefore what will decoloniality look like, and who would shape that. And in this, we've seen people, researchers, journalists, really being critical of the new movements. Again, Nanjala Nyabola, who is a Kenyan researcher, who has written extensively saying that everyone can tell you what Pan-Africanism stands for when juxtaposed with the West, but no one knows what Pan-Africanism means when it is self-referential. So when we are not anti, what are we using that time for? Then when you ask that question, something disappears, you know, and then there is an increased kind of, you can think it is matter, oftentimes, you know, dismiss it, but an increased kind of clash. If you're on social media, TikTok, every other month you see kind of African diaspora wars, whether it's South Africa versus US, African Americans, or Nigeria. It's a lot going on, but I think this has already been seen in many ways. I know, I remember how Dr. Panashe Chigumazi, who is a Zimbabwean-born writer, wrote extensively in what she said, I am no longer talking to, she has an essay called Why I'm No Longer Talking to Nigerians About Race. And she talks about the experience gap, how the experience of one place is not exactly the experience of the other, and the need for empathy and understanding of how histories of direct white settler colonization impacts people who live in those countries and could be living differently than you. And then the need to really cultivate consciousness, to understand systemic racial oppression in different localities, you know. So it's very important that as we talk about all this is happening at a certain time in the world, where we saw 5 years ago, we have the tragic the killing of George Floyd in America, and the subsequent protests that happened. I remember us writing about this, and many African people say, but we don't know that, but we don't have that. You know, like they're like, why are you? Yes, maybe in solidarity, but it doesn't concern us really, you know? And it took a lot to show them how police brutality looks like in Africa, and what do you think police brutality is? It's not normal to be policed. So the things we have accepted as people in colonized land, where there's no direct white presence, we really sometimes don't realize like how the consciousness can be so low in the actual work. Then you realize that work is really the amount of work we have to do is a lot. So hence you see many a few years later you see NSAS in Nigeria. We have seen so many protests against police brutality, but the lack of questioning the histories of police brutality and the need for policing and the militarization that we are experiencing as a continent, and knowing that as part of the sustaining and sustained political and global militarized structures is something that the consciousness even is still really wanting, and I think that this is a good platform and a good framework within which to cultivate, because oftentimes, whether it's dressing, whether it's naming, whether it's political contestations, we tend to not see how coloniality really is woven and relates us. Of course, feminism reminds us of the interlinkages of all these struggles and how they can look different, but they're from the same cloth. It's very important. And lastly, the other questions, for example, is currently we know the genocide going on in Gaza, and when most of us say the solidarity with Palestine has to remain until like the genocide in Gaza must concern us. It concerns us, and people are like, but what about Congo? What about Sudan? I'm like, yes, because I am yet to find someone who is African who talks about the plight of Palestinians and does not concern themselves with those struggles you've talked about. It's usually the people who really do not interact and understand the interconnectedness of these struggles that then they step forward to ask these kind of basic questions. Because even as we've seen Pan-African collaborations and standing with Palestine, we have seen increasingly, even when within Africa we have separated by language, language barriers, regional barriers, we are seeing increasingly that people are carrying all those flags and causes alongside each other, because we are increasingly making those connections. But for many people, it's like, why don't you just talk about Congo? Again, putting us in this colonial border. I'm like, I'm a Ugandan. I actually am born like an hour and a half from the Congolese border, an hour and a half from the Rwandan border. So for me, the experiences you're talking about are not foreign. And talking about Palestine does not mean I am not privy to what is going on in my backyard. I know that all these things, the global extractionism that is happening, is all connected in the militarization and the lack of progress. Even wherever you're a political activist or anything, the fact that you replace one regime with another, nothing shifts in the last 40 years of independence, should make you think of then what is sustaining all this? How come we've done all our work, we are nearly exhausted, but nothing is moving forward? So then you have to make those connections. And we have to continue to see that all those are related. From the peace deals that we see being struck, called peace deals, but not peace deals in DRC, backed by US and others, Qatar. Again, when you talk about G20, all these, some of these countries are in G20, but they are the ones on the ground expediting the global capitalist expansion into our communities and extraction of our resources and displacement of Congolese people. And UAE, fastening the displacement of Sudanese people. So it's very important to know that it's not enough for African countries to change a regime. First of all, it's not enough, but also it's not enough to add an African country into a larger group of geopolitical contestation. That we have to come back, and I will end this with I think again reading from Professor Sylvia Tamale's work about what do we do, you know? And she says, ultimately, for Africans, the agenda of decolonization and decolonial activism must involve reconstructions that focus on the following: reclaiming our humanity, rebuilding our territorial and bodily integrity, reasserting our self-determination, restoring our spirituality, dismantling the material and symbolic foundations of the colonial capitalist state. We must decenter Western hegemonies of knowledge and culture regarding race, gender, and sexuality. And we must look at reparations of historical wrongs and embracing our own philosophies like Ubuntu, which center interconnectedness of all things, the spiritual nature of human beings, the collective and individual identities, the collective and inclusive nature of family structures. So we have to look at all these things, and the fact that above all, our Africanness or our womanness and subversive agency should be celebrated. She reminds us of the need to celebrate ourselves. Yeah. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosebell, for providing that very needed context into this conversation to better understand and move forward in terms of how we engage with decoloniality, how we're able to uncover the colonialism that lives within and around us. And it's a very important conversation because I'm often in spaces where people tell me, well, that's a Western issue. You live in this place and you deal with white people all the time. And so I think this is critical in terms of we've situated this conversation as a response to the G20 in South Africa and understanding how coloniality shows itself in different contexts throughout the continent. So thank you so much for that. So we had a robust presentation, and I think we were going to do breakout rooms, but because of the time, we'll now just give space for anyone who wants to ask questions. So please prepare your questions. You can either put it in the chat, or you should be able to come off mute. If not, I believe one of the co-hosts will provide you with those rights to come off mute and also to put on your video so that you can ask questions directly. But before that, I would like to give the speakers an opportunity to respond to one another in like a minute or two, if there's something that you wanted clarification from the other speaker. And I also have some questions as well. So please, the floor is open. And if you'd like to speak, actually just raise your hand and I will unmute you. I think that might be the best way to go about this. So Rosebell and Tshepo, I will spotlight the two of you if you have any additional questions for the others, for the other.
Sarah, I'm good.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Spotlight you as well. Okay. So I think you should be able to see both Tshepo and Rosebell. If you have a question, do raise your hand. So my first question is, Rosebell spoke about the pervasiveness of coloniality in our movements, in our spaces, and we've often talked in the TDN space about the seduction of empire and the ways of empire, the dresses of empire, the terminologies of empire. They become such a part of how we see ourselves and how we see our movements towards modernity. So as we're gaining more space in global governance structures such as the G20, is it even possible to be in or desire to be in G20 spaces and still move towards decolonial liberation? That's a question for either Tshepo or Rosebell.
Well, it's thank you for that question. It's a very difficult question because on the one hand, the answer can be no, don't be part of the G20. to do that is cooptation. That is easy. It's easy to say that. It's an easy critique to make. But do you make a difference sitting inside or outside? I'm very aware that you can be inside and be co-opted. But can that be a step towards decolonization? I don't know. I know that sometimes very difficult decisions have to be made. It's the same as some of us who work for the state. When I joined the state as a commissioner, a lot of my friends said, "You've sold out." You become part of the system. Come with us and let's fight the system from outside. I don't know. I just know that, when you are in government as a president, when you have to make very difficult decisions, sometimes you think that the seat on the table is a way for you to remake the table in the long term. But oftentimes, unfortunately, it leads to cooptation. It leads to trying to change the master's house with the master's tools. And thirdly, it leads to neo-colonization at an African level. I ended up with the concept of sub-imperialism, that of course we are all fighting the empire globally. But within the global south, there are also sub-imperialists, countries that are in the south, but really in their mannerism, in the way they relate to other global south countries, they are also imperialists. So my response to you is that the easy critique is to say, yes, of course it's cooptation. Yes, of course it's selling out. But in the real politic, it might be very different. I don't know.
Thank you for that, Tshepo. Rosebell, I don't know if you have something you'd like to add. Otherwise, we do have a question. Somebody wants to ask a question from the community. Okay.
I think let's take a question.
Okay. Okay, then. Louisa, I've asked you to unmute. And I think
Hello. Thank you so much for all the presentations. I actually have many questions. It was very interesting, everything. So the first question, it can be for both of you. It's if it's possible to combine Marxist theories with decolonization without incurring into a epistemological incoherence, considering, all has been said. That's my main question, but maybe I can also say few others, and you can choose if you would like to answer those as well or not, or if it's too much. But I was also thinking about concepts like, for example, post-colonial era or post-colonial states. Many people have been mentioning those, even in decolonial spaces. And I've been wondering if those are, what do you guys think about this concept? Also, when we think about the imposition of the gender binary with colonization, I've been also seeing criticisms on that, saying that sometimes there could be some sort of the idealization of societies from before colonization, saying that there is not this gender binary or gender oppression. I do not agree with this criticism, but I would like to hear what you guys think about that. And also, as a when you mentioned about Palestine, Sudan, and Congo, that's something that I've been thinking about. I understand that they are all connected, and I agree with the comments. But at the same time, I've been participating in many Palestinian movements, and few times there is mentions about Sudan and Congo, but that's not as present at this Palestinian issue. Sometimes it makes sense in what we are fighting for on the context, specific context. But I also wonder if there's not a sort of racism there as well. Why we, like, Palestine got so much attention at this moment, and genocide is also happening in other places, and the same level of violence. And maybe as the final question of all, so we mentioned, like we've been discussing how decolonization is a whole process of deconstructing concepts. And I'm just starting with my academic life a bit, so I've never published anything, but I've been trying to publish on decolonial article based on my master's thesis, and that's a big struggle for me, because every time I want to decolonize a new concept, and I think there needs to be more decolonization, and then I cannot finish and publish because I always feel that I could decolonize my work a bit more. And so that's also one of the points. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louisa. I don't know if they'll get to all of your questions, but maybe if you can each answer one, and then we'll see if others have questions. Otherwise, we can come back to Louisa's points. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah, I'll take up just two on the gender binary and idealization. I think that it's a cautious critic, but I wouldn't take it seriously if it is actually a critic that really overlooks the dangers of the colonial imposed gender binary and gender hierarchy is what is urgent, really. And I think that people, like we said, we are not trying to go back. We are trying actually to reconstruct with what we know from the past and what we know today, that we walk away from what has been imposed on us. So therefore, I don't think that that should be something that kind of stagnates the debate where we need to be. No one says any society has ever been free of violence or free of certain contradictions and certain oppressions. But the reality is that we are specifically talking about things that are recorded, things that have survived. The fact that the hierarchy of gender expression and marginalizing people based on their sexuality is something that was imported. And the fact that not only just that, but gender as a construct itself is an imposed thing. So I would not really dwell on the idea of idealization, because we are not even possible to go back. So I think I'm more concerned of like, what are we getting from there, and what are we going forward with? What are we ditching? What are we going forward with? What are we reconstructing? I think that even what you reconstruct is open to criticism, because as we know, it's a construction, right? So it's not like this is a fact, this is this is the only way to be. But we know far better that we live in a gendered colonial construct on gender, and that people's relations of family, for example, things like nuclear family being a colonial construct that is being still imposed on us, and the idea of very many things surrounding gender, womanhood, who is a woman, who is not, all those things are coming from a very, very colonial lens. And if we can agree on that, then we can find ways of how do we go forward and reconstruct differently and dream differently, because we are not trying to look for the people of the past. Actually, the people we are talking about being impacted by this are part of us. They are here, and we can only say, how do we build together forward something that respects everybody? Then on Palestine, Sudan, I think my comment was more specifically to African spaces, Pan-African solidarity spaces. So I don't have experience outside Africa and organizing for Palestine outside Africa. From what I know is that I live in Senegal, and I've been learning on the work of Senegalese activists for Palestine, and the work they're doing on Sudan and Senegal, not only Sudan and Congo, but also Western Sahara, which is Africa's last colony, colonized by Morocco, Spain, and other European countries, plus America currently, holding it hostage, not allowing it to get independence. So we have seen that kind of persistent inclusion and going beyond. But in terms of course, the question, anti-Blackness is also like being a colonial construction exists everywhere. And I've already talked about Arabization, and that colonization did not come only from white people, it came also from Arabia. So you have stratified society within the, the Sudanese being at the bottom of the Arabian, racial construct is also a reality. And that's why we would see that the question of Sudan not necessarily become as, it has taken such a big toll, Sudan being one of the largest, maybe not the largest right now in the world humanitarian crisis. For us to be that, for actually people starting to talk about this kind of thing, to include understanding, but also understanding of the actors, right? To know that the EU is involved, the UAE is involved, and other actors, how coloniality works, that it's not just only the EU, and then how does America work with the EU, not the EU, but Emirates. How does America work with the Emirates to continue to exert control and dictate certain politics in the region is also a reality, you know. So I think that we can look at blackness and racialization also from the other side, from the Arab kind of world coming down here. Even within Sudan, I mean, the whole separates movement of separating South Sudan had also racial tensions around, you know, within Sudan, the racial questions are present, but it does not deter us from knowing that all our questions are connected, and that we'll continue to break that and stand. And the fact that Palestine is occupation has been running, and in many ways we shouldn't be engaged in Operation Olympics. We know what it is. We know it's an occupation. We know it's a genocide. We know it's massively funded and sustained, and the stakes are extremely high, and we should not lose that, you know. And we should know that it should even the violence that is happening there is already affecting us, whether Egypt, Ethiopia, all our relations are already affected. So it's not enough to say, we can't afford to say it's not about us, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosebell. Tshepo, I don't know if you have something that you really wanted to add. Otherwise, for the sake of time, I will. There's another hand, and maybe we can go to that question, if that's okay. It's somebody by the name of Idris Guerezis. Apologies. I'm going to ask you to unmute, but I think a lot of people signed on with that registration link. So if your name is not Idris, feel free to let us know and ask your question. Well, somebody had their hand up, or maybe that was an accident.
Hello?
Hello? Okay. Oh, it is Idris. Okay. Are you Idris? Because there were a lot of people who signed on, because I think Idris shared their registration link. So if you're not Idris, do let us know your name. And
oh, yeah. It's not Idris. My name's Papa Majob. That's why I got lost a bit.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. My name, I did not get the chance. I did not know where to enter my name. That's why I put Idris. And my primary language is French. It means I can understand English. Actually, but you will excuse my bad English. Yeah, I wanted to share my understanding from I got from this meeting about decoloniality, and I will start it with the first part of the meeting that I will link with the second part. The first part where it was said, notice your body, notice your leg, notice your arm. And while performing this, I noticed that I'm living or I'm stuck in my body. Living in my body means I'm not my body. I'm living inside it, noticing the tools. Like when I notice my hand, for example, and you cut it, I'm still living. It means my hand were not me. I'm inside. That is a tool I was using. And when you damage the tool at a level that I can't use it any longer, I will leave it some way or another. It means while doing it, I feel safe. I feel safe. Why? What's happening to my body is not happening to me. It's happening to my body. I'm safe because I'm just inside it. You can't touch me. You can't hurt me. I'm inside the body. It means even if you kill me, I will just leave the tool. Like I was talking to you on the phone, and you just throw the phone on the wall. You're not hurting me. You just cut the link. I will link it to the second part where it's deep inside the coloniality, because somehow the coloniality is a sort of legacy that we have of people saying how to live, what is the real value, what is important, what is not, and how life works. The fact is, human beings were living on the world since thousands and thousands of years, but no one has never cracked the code. No one understands how life works. Even if we had 900 years as an individual, at the end of that time, we will still not understand how life works. It means the question is not how long I'll live, but how I live. And ask yourself this question from the end of your life standpoint of view. It means like you looking backward on your life and see how did I live? Because that way you will have less regret. Even if you're living right now, you just imagine yourself sitting on a chair. You have 90 years old. What were important? What decision should I take? If you take me back to my 30 years old or such. And at this, if you consider the concept like this, you will not necessarily know what is important, not necessarily, but at least you will know what is not important. Knowing what is not important is already a big step forward. It means there is some burden you had on your head, above your head, but you just noticed it was not important though. That makes it a big step forward. And because you can't explain the whole life, but at least you identify this thing is not important. And back to the coloniality itself is a group of people showing how to live, what to trust, what to learn, what is interesting, and what is valuable or not valuable. That's what coloniality itself is about. And everyone's freedom stops where others' right starts. And I will conclude with this. Colonialism, decoloniality, I said decolonialism. I mean, decoloniality is not a concept that is supposed to makes us stuck in the past. But it placed us at the current time and shows us the world. Here is where the world is. Here is how far people and economy are connected and interdependent through worldwide. Here are the value that we discovered from the group of human beings back when they were separated and isolated, because human travel through time, and we discovered a group of people isolated, and here are the value that we discovered. And there you go. From now onward, define yourself, do not hurt anybody, and be happy. That is my take. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And your name again is Papa?
Majup.
Papa Majup. Papa Majup.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. And if you also, I see you joined from another account, so please do connect with us. I think our site address should be in the chat so that we can connect and hopefully continue these conversations going forward. And I wanted to, for the sake of time, we are at the hour. And so to thank Tshepo and Rosebell for this robust presentation and conversation. I think we could, in our spaces, we can go for quite some time. And we have been known to go over time, and I'm trying to keep to time. If there are any parting words or thoughts that you wanted to share in a minute or less, please feel free to unmute and do so. Otherwise, I will close out the session. All right, then. Thank you so very much for your interest, time, and energy in making this launch a success. We are deeply moved by the number of people who feel aligned with this work, who have shared their brilliance, their time, their networks, their energy, their good thoughts, their prayers to make this event a success. A huge thank you to our incredible speakers, Tshepo and Rosebell, for this conversation, sharing your expertise and perspective, and for your deep commitment to the work of care, love-rooted justice, and liberation. We are grateful to be in community with you. Thank you to the D20 planning team. There are about 15 of us, and you will get to know them throughout the series. You can also see the team on the intro page of the Decolonial 20 website. Thank you to the session support team, Shani, Tolu, Nikos, and Adanma, for all of your work in making this session a success. We will be sharing a recording of the session on our YouTube and event page, so please keep an eye out for that. If you would like to connect with us in terms with the TDN community, we'll be sharing our LinkedIn address in the chat as well. Note that if you registered for this event, you will get, and you accepted getting further notifications, you will get updates for the other 7 sessions of D20. If you have not registered but would like to get updates, please be sure to register for at least one of the sessions and tick the box to get updates. So I think with that said, we can close out. We are going to put the survey in the chat for you. We would really appreciate your feedback on the space, the meeting, what went well, what we could have done better, and it will really help us in terms of planning for the next D20 session. So thank you so much. We're only a minute over time, which is a record for me. I wish we could go on with the conversation, but we do want to respect your time, and we're so grateful that you could be here with us today. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you at the next D20 session, which will be October 24th. It will be a hybrid session, so it will be in Johannesburg, South Africa live. Adanma will be moderating. Adanma Yisa, the co-founder of D20, will be moderating that session, and they will have an online component. October 24th at 12:30 p.m. UTC time. You can find out more information on the Decolonial 20 event page that is in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Take good care. And please be connected, stay connected.